600 horsepower on pump gas videos, and today I will give out the build sheet and the cam specs on how we were able to achieve this. The previous video was on a 302 base motor, and that was a 325 stroke with a 4165, and this one here is a 4250 stroke on dart block and AFR heads, and I will post the dyno numbers and a complete look into the oiling system, so far so on, and I'll print the dyno sheet again from QMP because I like accurate dyno numbers, not some dyno numbers that are somewhat inflated, and it'll give you a full sense of great, but actually not so great. Okay, anyway, so we will start with this, and I will give you a rundown. I don't have the full video, but I have all the pictures documented on my Facebook. And before we proceed, please subscribe, like, so we can keep this going. Okay, so here comes the build-up via pictures, and I'll go through the explanation on how we're able to get that much horsepower out of a string. I mean, remember, this is built for torque. The other one's built for road racing, also torque out of the corners. People suggested, oh, you could have made more power by going with the 850 instead of a 750. You'll gain more out of that 589 posted. Well, yes, that's true, but that wasn't the point. The point was how I can come out of the corner strong, okay? And what the dyno's telling you and what the racetrack will dictate to you, two different things. Now, this build-up here is very interesting. It's a 4250 stroke, again 4165 bore, and at the same time it's built strictly for to pull a 7,000 pound pre-runner, okay, and also on pump gas. Anyway, so here it is, guys. Okay, here's the details on the block. It is in photo version because this has been a project that was done, oh my gosh, 10 or 12 years ago. So all I have are photos. So anyway, I will share it with you. Now, when you look at here, there's the Victor Junior manifold, Super Victor, should I say. With this much cubic inches, 454, you will never under manifold this engine or put too big of a head for what's available out there. Okay, and that's aftermarket block, 4-bolt main, and you can do the same project 4250 crankshaft in a factory block. The C9 casting is the DOs, 74 castings like they say. You can put the big stroker 4250 stroke crank in it with no clearancing problems. Okay, you have to cut through the bottom of the cylinder bore to clear the throws, but it will have the same kind of clearance. Here's the side of the block. Now, you can max out at 60 over with a factory block, which is like a 440 with a 4250 crank at 60 over. I would suggest that you go past that. If you do go to 60, put some block cement on the bottom of the board just to stiffen it up. Okay, and one thing here is that you have an option which is called the Sportsman block. It's a 2-bolt main block with an overbore capacity, and it's a very, very hard casting. Here's another photo, and there's a clear picture of the Victor, Super Victor manifold, and we're running a 750. Now, some of you will probably go in there and say, hey, you gotta make more power past that 598 that you've made on this dyno pool if you had an 850. Yes and no. I'm after torque because this chase truck is 7,000 pounds, and it's important that I have as much bottom end torque, which the dyno graph here soon I will post how much torque this thing is capable of producing. Big block territory is what it is. Okay, and that is very important to take note. And of course, it's an Iskanderian camshaft, as you can see right there. and next few pages I'll give the specs. Now here's the bottom end. Same thing on a factory 2-bolt main. You won't have these outer bolts, but it's the same exact width and length, and you can put the same. This is a billet crank from Crower. It's not gun drill, as you can see. It's not a high RPM unit. It's strictly for torque. Now, you can put this on. One day, if I could do that, I'll stick a 4250 crank on an aftermarket block and switch it over to a 2-bolt main block to aftermarket block, and you see there's no difference. Except here you have to cut for the throws. Right there, you can see it. All right, and you can see right there. I had to clearance that to clear the rod. Now, on this big cubic inch and most high RPM engines, when I check the bottom end, when I take the pan out, I take number 2 and number 4. If 2 and 4 are good, I already know 1, 3, and 5 will be excellent. Because at RPM or high RPM or lots of stroke, this crank wants to turn and twist to an S and loads number 2 and number 4. More than 1, 3, and 5. Okay, so take note of that, please. And the 2-bolt main will show the same exact wear pattern. If 2 and 4 has got some pitting from the cap jumping up and down and abnormal wear on the bearing, number 1 would possibly have it. But if 2 and 4, like I said, is good, perfect, like they say, or as good as, or looks like it's almost new, 1, 3, and 5 is good to go. All right, because the thing twists to an S and loads up those 2 main bearings. Here's the Oliver rod, 6-inch. Now, I would suggest not to run an I-beam next time when you do a big stroker, especially on Chevrolets, because this part of the rod hits the cam lobe. That's why on some of the Chevy, or I would say all the Chevy, they want you to run a small diameter camshaft or a small base circle cam. It's not necessary with the Ford. On this combination, I ran a stock diameter solid roller cam, even with the shoulder, but I wouldn't suggest it because sometimes I only have roughly 600 lift on there, and but if you have a lot more than that, this shoulder will be a problem. Either you have it machined, as long as the rod bolt doesn't protrude, you're okay. I would suggest running an I-beam because usually the H-beam, usually the H-beam is the shoulder is cut back like that, okay? And that is one big thing, especially for Chevy strokers. On the Ford, you're fine. You can get away with it. Running some heavy-duty bearings, heat-treated. That's why they have that burnt-looking color in there. And got to use good stuff, especially for some with this build. You're running a lot of lower RPM with lots of load. Okay, and bad bearings or inferior bearings, you're going to have problems. Now here's the camshaft. I suggest you run for an effort like this. 600 horsepower requires good things, good parts. Now if you have a flat tappet camshaft, if you notice the lobes here are quite wide. For the same amount of cam timing, you're going to have a lot more open valve area or valve opening because it ramps up through the maximum lift a lot wider across the board lift range or lift area. So solid roller is a must, but if you can find a solid cam, a hydraulic roller, that's also fine. Okay, but it's just that I'm not really that happy with 600 plus lift on a hydraulic roller. I'd rather go with a solid roller. This is made by Iskandarian. Now, The cam lift after lash of 23 is 617. Excuse me, 612. The duration at 50 is 250 at 50. Intake and exhaust is the same. There's no added duration of the exhaust. Now, when I installed this, it's on 112 lobe separation, intake and exhaust. But I had this 4 degrees advance just to boost up the low mid-range even more. Okay, and it's on a 112, so my cranking pressure is under 200, so I'm safe there. That's what you got to watch out for. Every time you have cranking pressure after 4 to 5 kicks on the needle, on the compression gauge, if you're right over 200, 210, you're going to detonate. All right? So under 200 with 91, 93, you're going to be fine. So think about your cranking compression. In fact, when you put this thing together, timing chain cover is still off. Okay, and is there a way you can crank it on your run-up stand? Check the cranking compression. Okay, put it straight up, see if it reads 180 or 175, and then you advance it 4 degrees forward or 6 degrees or 4 degrees like I did here, and you crank it again, which I did, and I was under, I think I was like 195. Perfect. Cranking compression after 5 kicks on the needle. I had that, and I knew it will not detonate. Okay, on a 112. Now, next one. Here's the camshaft. Camshaft. Excuse me, it's getting late. The piston. This is by Ross. It's coated on the side. And if you notice, I profiled the combustion chamber on the AFR so that I don't lose the quench pad. Very, very important. Like on my previous videos, if you have a round dish right here, you lost your combustion chamber. So I've asked Chris Madsen over there at Ross Business to make sure they profile that AFR combustion chamber for me to have my effective quench pad on the cylinder head not wasted away by having a round dish. Okay, because when you have your clearance correctly, this one pushes the mixture approaching TDC towards the center where they will be combusted. Now, if you look, I have lateral gas ports. 043 with a 3mm oil ring, if I remember correctly, and a heavy-duty piston pin. Lots of stroke, not a lot of RPM, lots of torque. It has to be very, very heavy duty. Now, there you go. I reversed the thing and I used the ring, oil controls ring there as a stop. And I pushed the ring into the bore. This is like my scoring tool. Actually, this is another piston with the same bore that I have extra, and I leave those oil rails in there so that I can square up and gap the rings consistently. Must do. All right, you don't have to buy them fancy tool. You have a lot of worn out pistons there or an extra. Just keep that as your squaring tool. I don't buy much of the fancy stuff. And there you go. And I think this was 23 top. Okay, now as note about ring gaps. 23 top, or sometimes I'll go 18, depends. Let's say you got 23. You add 3 more for your second ring gap. Okay, a lot of them before they say, oh, you get 18, you have to be 14 on the second ring gap, or if you have 23, you have to be 18 on the second ring. No, I run a wider second ring gap. If it's 23 here, it's 26, 25, 26 on the second ring. The reasoning is I run a vacuum pump on this engine, and any combustion pressure gets past the top ring in and gets trapped between the top and second ring. I need that out as fast as it can be via a vacuum pump or some kind of evacuation mode. You got to keep that crankcase clean of combustion pressures or buildup. So second ring is at the minimum. If I'm 23 on the top, the second ring becomes 23 also. Okay? Don't go by the old belief, oh, you gotta go tighter on the second ring, so forth and so on. No. Even without a vacuum pump, that's a good technique. You gotta find out it prevents top ring end flutter if you got a looser second ring. And again, as well, when you run a dry sump, make sure you play your ring gaps correctly and the tension in your oil control ring. That's very important. Now here is a problem. Some of these things, okay, with big stroker cranks and whatever, take note of your bottom. This is another engine I had to highlight here, and I took a photo of these. All right, this part of this particular engine, we cut it without compromising the strength. To do this one, if you have your, Crower or Scat, whoever is making your crank, tell them to cut maybe a little bit off the counterweights, because you're running a big 4250 stroke. This particular one, I think, is way over. It's a little bit over 4250. Okay, now you see what is going on there. And then with the I-beam, H-beam probably would have cleared, but check that. All right, and I think I have that's a 30 thousandths feeler gauge there, and it clears. If it's a lot closer to that, then you have this thing shaved off a bit, and then recheck the balance. Another side note for everybody to remember, let me stress this very clear. I don't like revving big stroker engines, Ford, Chevrolet, Mopar, whatever, on a small block with a big crank, because of this, what it shows in this picture. Look at the bottom of the piston skirt. Okay? And a side note, this was somebody's stroker that I had to redo. Has an I-beam which had issues with the camshaft clearance there, and of course what you have the counterweight. Run the longest connecting rod you can to push the piston up. If you have to run the pin to the ring, oil control ring, do so on big stroker engines. Okay? Because this is at the bottom dead center. If you notice, it has a tendency, especially if you got a lot of piston to wall clearance, it wants to wobble out of bottom dead center. Okay? If the pin is still above the cylinder wall, you're A-okay. As here, the bottom of this piston pin is level with the bottom of the cylinder bore. That's pushing the issue. If you can run 100 or 200 thousandths longer rod to push the pin into the oil rails, do so you do not have this situation. That's why when somebody one time told me, 15 years ago, I want to rev my 454 small block Ford. Now his was a 463 to 8,500. And I didn't have this picture to explain to him. I was just telling him with my hands how it comes down to the bottom of the bore and wants to wiggle out. Okay? This is a perfect illustration why you don't want to rev a big stroker Windsor or a small block Chevy. Some people will try it though, and then they break the doggone piston. They break the piston itself or the skirt, because it wants to wobble when it reaches bottom dead center. TDC is fine. Now, with a short rod, it has a lot of side loading, and it wants to wiggle this even back and forth, even worse. And then that will really take a punishment. Okay? So when I tell them a lot of stroke, run the longest rod possible. If you have to put the pin into the oil control ring and run those aluminum locks or those pins or whatever, or the rails to support it, do so, please. So if you can push this another 200 thousandths up, even better. But as you can see right here, this is level with that. And I showed this to the owner. This is what concerns me when you want to rev this up. That's why I said 454 off-road truck. Now, no 9,000 RPM with these things. Okay? 8,000 I'm praying. Okay? But if you're going to shift this at 86, 8800, that's why I prefer the 92. Okay, guys? Remember that. But, okay, now we're back to this stroker. Now, I use not really a Cloyce. At midpoint, I switched this over to the NASCAR timing set, which shows right here. It's not like the Cloyce. This is very expensive. At that particular time, I think I paid $750 for this set. And what's amazing part, you can pound this one heavy for racing. Take it apart, pull the timing cover off, and the doggone thing is still good. You hardly have any slack. Whatever is there when it's brand new, it's still the same. That's the Ford Motorsport. I think they had a name for that thing. Okay, but that's, I think it's a Hivo chain is what they call it. All right, and of course an MLS gasket for this cabinet. There's the AFR head. It's very, very interesting, and you just got to make sure that this rivet here, some of them protrude on the back. Certain brands is a Cometic, you don't have that issue, but when you put the head, make sure that it doesn't hang up into the clamping surface and lift the head, and now you're going to have trouble. Okay, there it is. That was on the previous chain before we switched it over, okay, to that Hivo, and that's the Cloyce. And when I told the guy you're going to run this in the desert, very heavy, especially when these things get airborne. Okay, when the wheels are up in the air, you got a lot of slack going on. You're going to have a lot of movement around this valve train. It's just a fact of life with off-road power plants. They get airborne, the engine freewheels up in the air, and then it lands on the sand, and bam, it catches. It takes a beating on this doggone timing chain. Okay? Now, here's the interesting part. This is a 15-quart off-road pan. And if you notice, I got dual pickups. The issue here, sometimes when you get airborne, the oil gets up in the crankcase there, it's sucking up air. It's a no-no. And when you're sucking up air, then it goes through here, you got oil, air. Here in a dual pickup, you kind of minimize that chance. All right, you're always going to have something going in to the billet pump. And the worst thing when you get airborne, it catches air and then liquid and then oil, air. That doggone oil pump shaft, again, like the drive line when you're airborne, it frees up, then suddenly it sucks a bunch of oil, then it catches, it wants to twist that oil pump shaft. Okay, so dual pickup mode, just helping it out for any kind of cavity or oil starvation issues. Here's a side view of it. Very, very impressive. Okay, and it clears the throws, and it's a 15 quart. Remember, few people realize the engine oil is really running hotter than the water temperature or the coolant temperature or the block temperature. That's why sometimes when you have an engine that burned up, as soon as you take off the valve cover and the oil pan, you go, whoa, that smells real bad. Because the oil is at a higher temperature than the water or the coolant. Okay? There's the picture of both the standard oil pump and the billet piece. I'm just trying to remember which company was this. It's been so long. All right, but the oil pump shaft's right there, and on this particular one is right here. Okay. Here's a side view. Very nice piece. It's a billet aluminum, and there's the dampener, zero balance. There it is installed, and you're looking at it from the bottom end. Okay, so when you get airborne, all the oil is up here. You get dual pickup, so hopefully the other line is catching some oil, and while the other one's possibly partially. So at least you got two sources. Okay, and it's going to help it pumping it, and your starvation issues when you get airborne is less when you have two pickup lines or like two pipelines, right? Instead of one. Okay, you're going to have a better chance of keeping everything oiled. There's the head after I went through with it. Okay, the AFR casting is pretty good, and I've did some improvements, changed the combustion chamber a bit, and then went through the heads a little bit differently. I had to change the short side approach and everything. That little thing there for the stud, don't worry about that. That doesn't affect flow. Now this, what I usually do on the exhaust, this is not for this engine. I remember that this is for one of the fast cars that I did. I usually reuse the outer flange and put in an aluminum piece there to take up, so when I bore wider to get more flow out of the exhaust. Not as much, okay? I tried to dissuade low lift flow, but a lot of maximum flow on max lift, sure. I try to stay away from good flowing heads on the low lift range. It tend to blow out the intake to exhaust. And instead of having that column charge caught inside the combustion chamber, it goes right to the exhaust. I will talk about that in other videos. Here's Dan, the owner, and Mike Metz getting ready to fire up. There's a Hemi small block there that I did, a billet head, and here they're finishing up after I got done. They're hooking up on the run-up stand, and we'll fire it up, put 2-3 hours in it, and readjust the valves and take it to QMP for the dyno. There's the serious guys. Okay, here's a series of guys putting on the valve covers. In fact, they came down. Dan and Mike Metz and the owner putting it up on the run-up stand, and before we take it to QMP, we're gonna run it for about 2-3 hours, shut it down, retorque the heads, adjust the valves, run it again. Just make sure the head bolts settle after repeated cold warm-up, operating temperature, and back to ambient. Keep cycling it until the head bolts are holding and everything. So we have a good foundation here, and we already know that the engine's good. All right, so there we are. The reactor flex plate is obvious right there. Its collar. Now we'll go next. Here it is on the QMP dyno. And here I think we're running our header for this particular setup. Okay, and we have the issue with that. It bolts up to their dyno. That's great. So instead of having a compromised header size, we don't need that. All right, and then you can see the big 750. Okay, like I said, 850 would have yielded me better horsepower, possibly 8 or 12 horsepower more, but that is not the issue here. We need torque more than a horsepower. Okay, so at a lower RPM. You don't want to build high RPM torque on a heavy truck. And if you notice, we didn't even use a 1-inch spacer. If we would have used a 1 or 2-inch spacer with this kind of cubic inches, we would have seen more horsepower out of it. But the owner just, as soon as I called up, hey, 598, I think he was friggin' happy. He goes, hey, okay, you wanted to try different spacers, carbon? No, I'm fine. Let's end it. How much I owe you guys? So he was freaking happy. And anyway, that's good. Next one here, that's the QMP dyno office. These guys are pretty impressive, and they give you consistent, true numbers. Okay, as close as it can get. I've been to other dynos where I've seen one is like up to 70 horsepower more than it was from QMP, and you start to wonder, wow, you're actually getting that much numbers? So they go out there and run it at the racetrack. They go, it's not even as strong as it said. Okay, so you want good numbers. QMP provides that, and there's another shop somewhere out there by San Bernardino that has the same thing. There it is, another picture. And we ran a 180 thermostat already, not like the previous one where we didn't have that provision and we didn't even know we're 109. Here we had it up to about 200 and maintained it there and made sure that we had to operate the temperature and make it all the adjustments. Another picture there, and if you notice, look at the big oil pan. Okay, 13 quarts in there. 13 or 15, but it's big. You gotta look at my notes, but it's big. It goes on the chassis, so it'll be pretty doggone good. Another picture of the dyno. The engine is still there, and running a water pump here. Okay, so we're running the actual water pump, not an external layout. Another picture. I think that was it. There's Mark, one of the best guys out there. He knows his stuff. And as soon as we hooked up, he asked me, where do you want the total timing to be? How high do you want me to rev it? Okay, so he's been there, done that. He's just not going to go in there carelessly, start pulling the levers and to find out where it falls off. And then I said, what if it falls off too high? And you blow the engine up. Okay, so he's very conscious on where you want him to end, and he follows your instructions like any professional would. Okay, there's Mark adjusting the timing, and then we'll go pull again. And there's the engine, the other side view of it. So I think that's an 1 7/8. Or was it a 2-inch header? I don't quite recall. Oh, okay. It's a 2-inch header pipes on that. Okay. So there we go. There's the thing. And there I am. Take it off, and I was going to adjust the valves and just make sure it's holding. Okay. And again, look at the massive oil pan. Hey, who's that guy? Here is the dyno sheet that you guys, I know, wanted to see. Let me see here if I can bring that closer. Oh, but anyway, here you go. Let me just scroll through. There you go. 6,400 RPM, 598.8. Like I said again, we could have gotten that higher number if we had added a spacer, 1 inch or 2 inch spacer. It needed plenum volume due to the fact that when I was reading it at that RPM at 598, it's pushing 2 inches of vacuum, which tells me that the intake is kind of restricted. I think that's the carburetor more than the manifold. Okay, 2 inches of vacuum. Still, if we would have put an 850 in there, it would have the vacuum, total maximum vacuum, probably would have dropped an inch or below, and it would have gained some power. But that's not the issue here. We need hard hitting, low and mid range, especially for that heavy truck. 573 foot-pounds of torque. Okay, that's very, very impressive. Very impressive. There you go, closer picture. But there we are, there's the whole graph. Okay, 573.4 at 4,800 RPM. Look at how this is real fat. Right about the mid-range. I mean, actually all across the board. Okay, the torque is pretty doggone good. So I think that's our project. And let me see if I can find the video, if I can trace it, of the actual pull at the dyno at QMP. Here's another shot, whatever this is. No, it goes further down, 3,600. 470 foot-pounds of torque at 3,600 RPM. That's where our 302 pump gas motor maxed out. I think 469. Okay, but this is a bigger engine. Hit that at 3,600. Impressive. Now here's the exhaust port. After we pulled it from the dyno, look at the coloration. Nice. Okay, and pulled the thing out. We looked at all 8 cylinders, and they all look uniformly the same color, grayish. Yeah, gray, very light gray. Okay, so I think this is all. I'll try to see if I can find a dyno video. Anyway, I hope that videotape was informative. And think about it, there's nothing more impressive than having a small block that weighs around 500 pounds, okay? Less than that with a stock block. Perhaps maybe 525 with an aftermarket or 550. I gotta weigh them again. It's got a 4,250 stroke. That's more than a big block Chevy, Ford, or Chrysler. Think about that. In such a small package. And like I said, on the street, torque is king. RPM is at the racetrack. Now, think about that. It's a 454 cubic inch with a 4,125 bore and a 4,250 stroke. If you take that up to 4,185, 4,175, or 165, you got like a 463 cubic inches or something like that. That's impressive, okay? And you can easily make 600. Now, like I said, let me rehash this again. This was built for a chase truck that's owned by a big company right now. They bought the whole truck and the engine I built for it. And that made 600 horsepower. That is impressive on pump gas. If you just add, like I told you the specifications on the camshaft, if you just add another 10 degrees, still streetable on this kind of cubic inch, on this small block stroker. Add 260 at 50 with 11 to 1, 11 and a half to 1. Easy to make 640, 650 horsepower. As you can see, this is choked up, but then again, I wasn't after horsepower with this thing. In fact, when we dynoed this thing, excuse me, the first spool already got to 5. Oh, just a tad under 600, and I called the owner to give him the news, and he goes, that's it, stop, I'm happy. He was, because the goal was to make 600 for his chase truck, and we accomplished that. And if we would have added a 1-inch spacer or a 2-inch spacer just to give it a little bit more plenum volume, with the added intake duration, maybe another lift to 640 after last 6, that's still streetable in today's times. You could easily make 650 plus on pump gas, okay? And if you want to have octane booster in there and you play your combustion chamber right, 12.5 on the straight, oh my God, you get close to 680, 700 horse out of a small block, okay? And you put that on your lightweight car, oh my God. But about torque, okay? I've run all sorts of combination. My best combination is 9.2 because it gives me just the right length of rod and the right piston design, whereas a 9.5 deck, sometimes it requires too much of a long rod. And it's a point of diminishing returns where the rod sure is indeed long, and like Smokey Unix said, run the longest rod you can. I agree with that. But there's a certain point of diminishing returns where the rod becomes heavy, even if it's aluminum. You just got too much mass going up and down there. So to me, 9.2 deck, okay? And we've run big motors, 454 plus, small block. And they really don't go any faster, even on the 8th mile, okay? If everything being equal, there's just something in RPM at the racetrack and torque on the street that differentiates the two, okay? And if you have an old school 69, 70 Mustang like I have, 454 small block is stout with a top loader. You all the hot rodders know what this is all about, okay? And that's what I intend on running on my 70 Mach 1. Okay, I got a top loader in there with the Lincoln Continental housing, 9-inch Ford. And it is awesome, scary. Now with the Cleveland, it's basically a big block Chevrolet on a small block body, okay, or frame. Anyway, we'll continue on. Please like and subscribe to Ben Alameda Racing. I need your help so we can keep this going. And I would sure like to give insightful, knowledgeable, replete of guesswork, okay? And I'd like to be more exacting. Got a lot of schooling that I've gone through, from automotive to aerospace, jet engines, reciprocating engines, which are piston aircraft engines, and of course all the classes that my old mentor Charles D.C. Stevens, we call him Dirty Charlie, I owe him a lot. And I'm giving you guys an insight to a lot of stuff that I learned through the years, not only studying but racing, okay? Values, teams, and everything. So please like and subscribe, then we go from there, okay? Next one is more hardcore information. This is coming up. Thank you.